In mass culture, we frequently see Aryans, or the elite of the white race, depicted as blonde and blue-eyed people, the so-called Nordic race, although in reality it was quite the opposite. In this video, I will review and disprove this Nazi propaganda myth and re-establish the scientific view on the problem, also giving you some interesting insights. First of all, let's look into the story. Some people believe that Indo-Europeans and most of the elite throughout history were blonde and blue-eyed, and these people have some magical abilities due to their pigmentation. That in itself is not the worst assumption. However, attributing this large amount of difference to this minor trait should in itself be ridiculous. It's evident that a lot of the genius talents had dark hair and brown eyes, while at the same time staying white. No real research can provide a significant difference in performance for these groups, except maybe in something like the beauty industry, as blonde hair and blue eyes are often considered more beautiful. Nevertheless, in some cultures the opposite was the beauty ideal. In Ukrainian culture, for a long time the handsome guy is the one with black eyebrows, and the kornobrivci or black eyebrowers are one of the unofficial Ukrainian ethnonyms ever since. Also, Ukrainian Cossacks would frequently shave their heads and leave a single strand of hair called chub, hence the necessity for it to be black, as a blonde chub would be absurdly laughable and wouldn't serve its purpose of intimidation and brutalism. The blonde, blue-eyed trend there is new and is connected primarily to the Eastern Russian-speaking population. All of these trends are not random and have nothing to do with character or intelligence, but rather are local preferences caused by nature and culture of the place at a given point in time. For example, Ukraine is a considerably sunny region bordering steppes and rare forests, a large part of which is a so-called forest steppe. People get tanned there easily and would look ridiculous with a lighter pigmentation while being swarthy, as most of the people throughout history were peasants or warriors, vulnerable to the sunlight. That circumstance created a demand for darker men and women, looking organically and harmonically in the natural conditions. The best thing here, the transition is not hypothetical, it's fixed by genetics. As in the medieval period, the contemporary Ukrainian territory was filled with mainly blonde and blue-eyed samples, typical of Slavic population, while in modern-day Ukraine dark pigmentation became predominant, while genetics have not changed at all and remain extremely similar to their Slavic neighbors in Poland, Belarus, and Russia, with a significantly lighter composition. The reason for the blonde spread in Scandinavia and other European countries is really the weather, rainy and cloudy on most occasions, which allows people to avoid much tan and combine their pale skin with harmonious hair and eyes. Also, blue eyes would give their bearers an additional night-seeing boost, as stated in numerous research studies. We see a perfect correlation between eye color and the number of sunshine days, and blonde hair just catches up to this trend to harmonize the appearance. There are some exceptions to this paradigm, which I will talk about subsequently. So why do Arcadians and the British have much darker pigmentation than their Scandinavian counterparts, while not being exposed to sunshine at all? This question is as reasonable as it's answerable. To understand the cause, you need to dive into the history of the British Isles, as ever since they were conquered by darkly pigmented Indo-Europeans, the local populations pretty much preserved the same way of life, staying pastoral and war-seeking patriarchal societies. The vast part of the British Isles for the time being was tundra and steppe-like, allowing them to hold great herds and wander easily, which is the reason why, unlike Spain or Italy, the British Isles were so easily conquered by the Beaker people, and 80 to 90% of the gene pool was replaced. These people did not require any sexual selection, nor did they want to look harmonious. Their real goal was to beat their enemies and build the greatest clan. So their look, pretty much like for a Ukrainian Cossack, would need to inspire fear and horror in their foes, and dark hair and eye color combined with pale skin produced quite a horrendous appearance. The redheads and light pigmentation in Orkney and the British Isles can be attributed to the Viking expansion, as Scandinavia at the time already was lightly pigmented. However, their skin was staying mostly swarthy, just not exposed to tanning. It's worth mentioning that Ireland and Great Britain are the palest countries in the world, hence the American rednecks, which I consider a racial slur for people who get sunburnt instead of getting a tan. It's literally a racial term to describe a skin color, mostly for Americans descended from the British Isles. Swedes and other Scandinavians preserve lighter hair and eyes, while having a swarthier complexion if staying under the sun for a long time, much like the Germans. The Celtic population of the British Isles was brutal and warlike, as described even by Romans. They were harsher than Germanics and almost resembled monsters, therefore their darker eyes and hair. I have mentioned that Beaker Indo-Europeans were dark, and I will elaborate on that. In fact, so-called Aryans or Proto-Indo-Europeans of Yamnaya culture, the people who contributed 50% to Northern Europeans and 30% to the Southern, the ones who most would consider the white ancestors, were predominantly brown-eyed and black-haired. Their skin was rather pale or intermediate, although sometimes dark. The key point here is who they were, and pretty much the description would not be different from what I have said about the insular Celts. They were brutal war bands of men with a heavily patriarchal structure and a desire to fight and conquer. Besides their appearance, they also were stronger and taller than their foes in Old Europe. They were wandering pastoralists and drank milk, as well as riding horses and producing deadly, innovative weapons. The people in Old Europe that they attacked were often matriarchal, egalitarian, peaceful farmers praying to a goddess, without significant weapon production. People who talk about Old Europe often forget about the fact that, besides these populations, there also was a Western hunter-gatherer or WHG descendant component, obliterated in Southern Europe, nevertheless overly represented in the colder grasslands of Britain, Germany, and Poland, performing a great resistance against the farmer offensive. We record a lot of violence exactly in that region, which looks like a simple reprisal by these hunters. And as time passed, we can see how the amount of WHG gene pool grew rapidly, as they presumably acquired farming technologies and used their blatant strength combined with food production to overcome the odds and return their land. It's evident that in Britain, they almost fully reacquired control and partially regained positions in Germany and Poland. One factor which I left behind, and that is relevant to the topic of the video. By the moment when Indo-European expansions began, Old Europe gradually became blonde and blue-eyed, combining components of different populations and going through sexual selection, as well as undergoing processes which I described in the first part of the video. In the peaceful farming population, this transition is just a matter of little time, despite the fact that initially the farmer population was pretty dark. So, the conquest begins. Dark Indo-Europeans conquer light Europe and take the wives they consider most beautiful and exotic, the light ones, once again changing the pigmentation landscape in Northern Europe, to the point where some regions gradually regain their lightness through the same processes of harmonization, or, like Arcadians, retain darker pigmentation. As for Ukrainians, they just return to the steppes and experience the processes that initially forced steppe Yamnaya to be dark. Also, the reason why Slavic people at the beginning and later had blue eyes and fair hair is their ethnogenesis taking place in the sunless space of the Paulician marshy territory, and later migrations to primarily wooded regions of Eastern Europe, caused by the forest burning method of farming they used. The point of this video is not to criticize racial realism or genetic determinism, but to encourage people to unite on the basis of their whiteness, not imaginary Nordic Aryan phenotypes. The reason why we are right-wing is not because we pretty much like a certain physical appearance, but because we respect character and intelligence in people. And if the person is black or even orange, the horizontal networks still would work with them. If we're similar, we should unite and fight against the real different people. That's why white people are beyond eye color debates, because white genetics pretty much gives people the same character and produces a decent amount of smart people, unlike, evidently, most of other races. That's the real reason to support a pan-European idea, not anything else. The different character and low intelligence are the reasons for anti-migration, not primitive xenophobia or the disputable danger of violence. Some migration groups are even less violent than white people. However, they are much more dangerous than the aggressive ones in perspective. Be stronger and smarter, and don't let anyone fool you into ignorance. Both the low intelligence part of the right wing and the centrist desire to bring a Trojan horse. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and agree with my ideas. Also, write a comment if you disagree with me and want to express a different opinion, or just want to add something to the narrative.